So, Genisys changes the future with timelines. Who would have guessed? We now have a Terminator multiverse. So, what cool things could we expect from the next two sequels? Okay, just for anyone who is watching this and hasn't seen Genisys, big spoiler alert. You have been warned. However, you will need to see the film to really understand the process of why I've come to these conclusions. If you're toying about seeing it, check out my review by clicking on it now. Here are some of my thoughts of what I would like to see or think could happen. Let's start by saying the writers have chosen to ignore the events of Terminator 3 and Salvation, so the chance of seeing, for instance, a young Kate Brewster or a TX is very unlikely. So in Genisys, the Resistance finally defeats Skynet. They find the time displacement device and realise a Terminator was sent back to 1984. Kyle Reese offers to go back to rescue Sarah. Just as he's transported, he witnesses John being hijacked by Alex, who is a T-5000 played by Matt Smith. This tragedy causes a shift in the timeline and Kyle Reese travels to an alternate 1984. But this is not before seeing himself as a child because of timeline disbursement. The T-5000 infects John Connor with what can only be described as machine cells, effectively replacing his cells on a molecular level. This turns him into a new threat, the T-3000. I took from this point that Skynet has found a way to take organic human form, in this case of Alex, and not only is able to infiltrate the Resistance undetected, but is able to jump between timelines. So despite how many times Skynet has jumped dimensions, the results of the war has always been the same. That is until the T-5000 grabs John. For me, the big question after viewing Genisys was, who sent the T-800 to rescue a 9-year-old Sarah? After all, she was very vague in dialect when telling her story to Kyle. But as we understand it, her parents were killed before the Terminator she now refers to as Pops finds her. My theory is, according to Sarah, it was the T-1000 that murdered her parents, which Terminator Pops manages to dispose of, but she was never very clear on the details or actually saw what events took place. It could be, and this is what I'm thinking, as convoluted as the T-800 being the threat in the first place. But Sarah, Kyle or another changed the timeline by reprogramming it, but not before it killed her parents. After all, I can't imagine destroying a T-1000 was that easy, considering what they had to go through in the beginning of the movie. And let's not forget, after the T-800 finds Sarah, he didn't even look battle scarred, as I'm sure he would have if it had faced off against the T-1000. There's also the emotional damage once Sarah realises that the T-800 is responsible for her parents' murder, a conflict I'm sure the writers would like to visit. Throughout most of Genisys, Kyle gives clear warning of what a Terminator is capable of, including Pops. So for me there is some danger surrounding the young T-800 appearing, but I can't help feel he was responsible for killing Sarah's family, whether he was tampered with or not. Even if it was just to pave the way, making her solely reliable on him for what is to come in the future. John Connor gets sent back in time as the T-3000 a few years before Sarah and Carl arrive in 2017. While John is there earlier, he's helping Cyberdyne create the T-800 chip, which in Judgment Day, Miles Dyson was close to creating before Linda Hamilton and crew made him aware of his mistake. Towards the end of Genisys, there's a scene between John as the T-3000 and Sarah where he's holding her, breaking her skin in her shoulder with his finger. Now, for all we know, he could be releasing those machine cells, which at some point could become a problem for her later in the sequels. After stopping Skynet's plan for Genisys, Kyle Reese has some quiet words with his younger self of what I can only guess is the story of what actually happened. He is also likely to inform himself of John Connor's abduction by the T-5000. Okay, so after his chat with his younger self, Carl, Sarah and an upgraded Terminator, thanks to his dip in polyalloy, contemplate their future now that they think the threat has been eliminated. But it's obvious to anyone that Skynet, shown in a hologram form of the T-5000 during the credits, survives the Cyberdyne building blast and will obviously do something to put its war on humankind back on track. This of course will change future events they are now in, with the only way again is by changing the timeline. This is where Sarah, Kyle and Pops build another time displacement device to send them back to combat Skynet's plan. Or try and find the source of the T-5000 from John Connor's T-3000 meddling in 2014. Carl and Sarah conceived John Connor in 1984, but because this timeline has changed, remember we're in 2017, if they do copulate, they could end up with a Jane Connor or even twins, as it was hinted that conception may only occur when the machines rise, as in Michael Bihn's Kyle Reese, after he was sent back as in the original Terminator. However, because of the events in Genisys, the timeline of the original Terminator never actually happened. Another possible route is Skynet attempting to eradicate the Reese family rather than focusing on Sarah, now it knows that Carl is the father to John. Whatever happens in the next sequel will probably focus heavily on Alex the T-5000 and the lead up to its existence and infiltration within the Resistance. And for me the biggest question is, will Arnie's upgraded Terminator be their biggest threat in the last film, somehow being used as a big pawn in a number of timelines? My guess is yes, as it would literally bring the franchise full circle. I'm only guessing at this stage, but more than likely some important events in Genisys will replay in the next two sequels, with some events crossing paths from the first. Whatever happens, it should improve the Genisys storyline further and answer those questions we are all dying to know. As a side note, according to rumours, the next two films will be made back to back, with the final film being shown in 2019, the year the rights revert back to James Cameron. So what's your interpretation of Genisys? Where do you think the trilogy is headed? Please leave your comments below and don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thanks for watching, and until next time.